Hi, I'm Sean Griffin. Welcome to Kingdom in Context. Hi there. Welcome back to Honor of Kings. I'm Sean Griffin, and my co-host with me,
Ken Heidebrecht.
Hey Ken, welcome back. It's good to see you again this week.
Good to see you too, Sean. This week's been pretty good. I celebrated a birthday a few days back, and another year of the heavenly luminaries performing their circuit above my head.
Yep, it's it makes you wonder if you didn't keep your birthdays, if people would if it would mess with your mind, or if it would encourage your mind as you progress in life to not feel old. You know what I mean? If you just somehow were to have selective amnesia, but just specifically about your birthday, if you wouldn't feel old by the time you get to 70 or 80. So
Yeah.
it makes you be a fun experiment to see if it's really in your mind or not. But
starting now, Sean, it'll be my experiment. Yeah. I'll undertake it.
Yeah, but as we're reading in the book of Enoch and also Genesis, apparently these guys were living hundreds of years, and as a result, they were, it was being recorded in Genesis, and I'm just guessing that they recorded it in their own personal lives as well. And so I've tried to imagine, for other writings that I've done, I've tried to imagine this idea of when you're having your 500th birthday, like what the heck is that like? Imagine, Jared, right? And he's having his 700th birthday, and Adam shows up, and Mahalalel shows up, and what I'm saying, his son Enoch is there or whatever. I don't know if that's their accurate timeline, but just that'd be amazing. And all your other relatives you aren't mentioned, they're all there, and they're like, yay, 700 years, congratulations. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to try to outlive Adam. I got another 200 to go.
500? That, you youngster, you still got 300 years to catch up to me.
Yeah, talk to me when you get to 700, then we'll talk. Talk to me when you get to 800, then you may have some wisdom. Yeah, it's just the paradigm is just amazing. It's just, I can't even fathom it. But
I just can't fathom how much they were able to learn. They had so many years to learn and to experience life, and we have to cram it, if we're lucky, between 60 to 100 years, and it's almost doesn't seem fair, Sean. It's like you can learn so much in the span of a lifetime, and these guys get like 10 lifetimes.
Yeah, it's truly mind-boggling because once you compound knowledge, then by the time you're 300-400 years old, you've learned 10 times more than the average intelligent person in our day who lives only 70 years. But then at 300 or 400 years old, you've taken all that compounded knowledge and you can pass it on to the next generation. By the time, as they're growing up, by the time they're 50 years old, they're still a youngster in your eyes. They're still 10% of someone who's 500, but yet they've got all that knowledge from someone who's 500 passed down to them. And that's how it compounds so fast. And so people could be extremely smart, which is why you have all the theories about all the ancient technology that was antediluvian technology, pre-flood. In addition to what we've already read from Enoch about the holy watcher angels, 200 of them descending, and how they were teaching mankind extra skills and things about, how to work in, metals and how to produce certain things and do enchantments. They were teaching them some bad things from a spiritual nature, but also some practical usage of the materials of the earth. And so it seems real basic what they were teaching them, but at the same time, it's probably how they were using it, which is what gets real technical,
Yeah.
Because
and then you can understand why some of these patriarchs that were living so long were able to become known as righteous men walking with God, as they had so much time to learn and to adjust their behavior and set it accordingly, and it became a pattern where they could live it out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get a habit ingrained in you for 20 years in this lifetime, and people think that's amazing, right? You get praise from friends and family that you've been doing something consistently for 20 years. Now imagine doing it for 300 years, and then the ingraining of that pattern of behavior, like you said, it'd be really, really hard to kick. So it's like, it's almost like you get to, and this is just me theorizing, but it's almost like you get to a wave, like the crest of a wave, and you've seen all the temptation that life can throw at you, and you're at the crest of the wave, and you've decided, am I going to fall back down the wave, or am I going to go over it? Am I going to overcome all this temptation and find myself into a smooth pattern of life that, because I know how to deal with these things, because you've had decades upon decades upon decades to try, right? To weed out the bad behaviors and fall into a pattern of righteous behavior.
And it's interesting, Sean, because in some of these extra biblicals, it talks about how in Genesis 6, where it says that my spirit will only reside with men for 120 years. We know in some of the extra biblicals that's in reference to them, Yahweh graciously and mercifully giving the men of the corrupted age during that time 120 years to turn. So they had a long time to turn, right? Yeah,
that's a long time. I mean, and supposedly Noah was a preacher of righteousness. I don't know. I doubt he was on a street corner, but preaching with the sign up. But I think that whomever he was coming in contact with in his life, he was a preacher of righteousness. And I think that we know the definition of that from Scripture is that he was preaching God's instructions, God's Torah, God's law for behavior. And so to me, you got 120 years. And, this is where we run into this famous passage in the New Testament where it talks about, and not having seen the judgment come that was about to come. Noah was preaching to them of something that they didn't know about. And so he's trying to express to them there is judgment coming. Whether they believed him or not, they could still see his pattern of living and see righteousness and change their ways. But, I mean, it's when you look at the practices of occult behavior and everything that's involved in that, it's highly addictive because it deludes your brain with the sense of pleasure and power. That only leads to destruction, And so, and of course, all the backlash of it creates chaos on all levels. And that's what we see mentioned to us in Genesis 6:5, that there was only evil in men's hearts continually. And the Father was repentant that he made man on the earth because of all the evil that was happening, the chaos. So I think that's interesting. And also, in the Hebrew, when we look at the flood story, I heard a pretty amazing thing that the word for chaos in Hebrew is Hamas, which I think is interesting because that
sounds familiar. Sounds like a modern day terrorists faction.
Yeah, Hamas is the name for chaos in the Hebrew used in Genesis 6. So I think that's it's highly ironic, right?
For sure.
Okay, so this week, guys, we left off last week in chapter 11. This week, we're starting to pick back up with chapter 12, and we're going to get into some much more interesting concepts, right? Because we're going to explore deeper this idea of the judgment that's going to happen to the Watchers, how Enoch is interacting with the Watchers, and what God continues to say about the situation. So, Ken, do you want to start off with the reading, or you want me to?
I'd love to, Sean.
Okay, chapter 12.
Okay. Before these things, Enoch was hidden, and no one of the children of men knew where he was hidden, and where he abode, and what had become of him. And his activities had to do with the Watchers, and his days were with the holy ones. And I, Enoch, was blessing the Lord of majesty, and the King of the ages, and lo, the Watchers called me, Enoch, the scribe, and said to me, Enoch, thou scribe of righteousness, go declare to the watchers of the heaven, who have left the high heaven, the holy eternal place, and have defiled themselves with women, and have done as the children of earth do, and have taken unto themselves wives. You have wrought great destruction on the earth, and ye shall have no peace and no forgiveness of sin, and inasmuch as they delight themselves in their children. The murder of their beloved ones shall they see, and over the destruction of their children shall they lament, and shall make supplication unto eternity, but mercy and peace shall ye not attain. So Sean, right away there, sounds a lot like Jude 1:6 to me.
Yeah.
Watchers of heaven who have left the high heaven, the holy eternal place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They left their first estate and they descended and apparently just continued to live down here. They didn't make any, because they were told that they couldn't come back. And so they were just living down here. And it makes sense that they couldn't come back if they've defiled themselves, because apparently they're, in a sense, they're now unclean. And I don't know exactly how that works out as far as if they were able to make themselves clean over time. Like we see in the law, if you become unclean, there was a process, and then later you became clean again, so to speak. Right. But this seems to be a much more serious defilement, because I think we read later on in the later chapters, I think in chapters 80 or whatever, where it talks about that they changed their form when they came down. So it was almost like they took on some sort of different type of nature to come down and interact, which maybe have disqualified them from a physiological standpoint to get back to their original nature. So now they're eternally defiled. That's just speculation. We can dig into that further when we get those later chapters, but that could be what it's meaning when it talks about the defilement here. And it could be what Jude is talking about when it says they left their first estate and their habitation. So
something that I was looking into, Sean, while studying these chapters here in Enoch, I was reading Jubilees the other day, and something stood out to me. I just want to get your opinion on it. It says in chapter 4, verse 15, actually halfway through verse 15, it says, and he called his name Jared. So Jared is being born here now. For in his days the angels of Yahweh descended on the earth, those who were named the Watchers, that they should instruct the children of men, and that they should do judgment and uprightness on the earth. So the way I understand that is, originally the Watchers in Jared's day were supposed to be tasked with teaching righteousness and instruction on the earth to children of men. And sometime during that period is when these 200 angels decided to stray away from that and go their own way, as they were getting, tempted towards the sons of the daughters of men.
Yeah. Is it possible that, remember Azazel was teaching them how to make antimony and beautifying of the eyelids and different things, right? The ideas of makeup, teaching the women how to do that. Is it possible that kind of played into this scenario, that the angels took notice suddenly of the women because they were, being jazzed up, so to speak, with all types of makeups and different types of, portrayals of seduction, that suddenly the brain starts kicking, they start thinking about stuff. Because it says that they, what verse does it say? Does it say they actually lusted after the women? Is that in the judgment in chapter 15?
I think it's in that chapter, is it? Sure. While you're looking for that though, I used to just believe that because like you said in previous episodes, we're led to believe in church that these fallen angels fell from heaven and they came and they corrupted. But according to Jubilees, these angels, these watchers, originally were supposed to be instructing men in righteousness and proper instruction. And maybe they did that for a little while before they got tempted. I had just always thought that they started right away in the days of Jared of being these corrupted watcher angels, but it seems to indicate in Jubilees at least that wasn't their initial way.
Absolutely. And I think I found what we were just mentioning. It's in chapter 15 verse 4, and it says, and though you are holy and spiritual, living the eternal life, you have defiled yourselves with the blood of women, and have begotten children with the blood of flesh, as the children of men do, and you have lusted after flesh and blood, as those who die and perish. So it's just an interesting thought that they're, it's just this idea that Genesis 6:1, right? They saw the daughters of men were beautiful and they took wives. So they actually found them attractive and lusted after them in a sense, which is interesting because, like we talked about in last episode, these watchers in heaven and apparently all the angels were created male, with actual male parts. And I just think that that's interesting because a lot of people teach that, they're genderless. I've heard that, and that's why I've brought this up twice now in 2 different episodes, just because that seems to be an idea that's propagated falsely through, entertainment and movies and all kinds of stuff like that, and that they were created genderless, but then they had to take on a body with male parts in order to come do this deed. But Jubilees tells us from creation they were made with male as a male. As we know a human male and all the parts included, they were made in that fashion. And so there was this inherent obedience that was required of them from the get-go. Like this, that old saying, I can't remember the scripture right now, but, the greater, the more you've been given, the more is expected of you, Yeah. I think it's in 7. But this idea that they were given access to the Father, they're the angels of his presence, they're hanging out with him, doing the deeds of the Father, they're in the heaven, they're created greater than mankind was, and they're also given the same physiological anatomy of mankind. And here we are, there's more expected of them, there's more restraint and control expected, but a very, very small portion of them did not have that constraint and that control.
That's right. But a couple chapters later in Enoch, chapter 19 in the version that I'm reading, it might be different in other versions, but it says that, I'll just read it real quick. For in the great day of judgment, with which they shall be judged until they are consumed, and their women also shall be judged, who led astray the angels of heaven, that they might salute them. So to me, that seems like it wasn't just, when we read Genesis 6 and other passages in Enoch and Jubilees that, the watchers came upon the daughters of men and forcefully took them without like any type of consent or nothing, right? To me, it seems like the women, they played a part in the watchers, obviously lusting after them. And they did it with nefarious, intentions.
Yeah.
So, and then they get a judgment in that chapter for doing that. So it wasn't just specifically the angels going forward, grabbing these women and impregnating them with however their methodology, root cutting or whatever it was. The women, there's a two-way street here, right? It takes 2 to tango, as they say in marriages.
Yeah. So this is what you're saying is there was consent.
There could have been consent.
There was consent on both sides, and both were wrong for it.
Yeah.
And that's because there's all the chaos that ensued. But yeah, that's interesting. Just so people have a clear idea of this concept, so they're not mistaken that all these things were going down, and that's what we read from chapter 6 up to chapter 10, and then the angels, and then God in chapter 10, he pronounced judgment that was going to be happening, and he explained the different types of judgments that was going to happen, both one for Azazel, another judgment for Samyaza and all his associates, and then another different judgment for the Nephilim themselves, which are the offspring of this union between the rebellious angels and the women. And so here we pick up in chapter 12, where he's basically just talking about, he's just kind of repeating these ideas of what they did, how they did it, and that they're not going to have any mercy, which is interesting. In verse 6 here, it says, the murder of their beloved ones they shall see, over the destruction of their children they will lament, and they shall make supplication unto eternity, but mercy and peace shall ye not attain.
Yeah, and verse 5 says that they're not going to receive any forgiveness of sin.
Yeah.
So that is super harsh. I mean, can you imagine if that was the same condemnation and judgment for mankind?
It would be, and that's what I was getting at when I was saying, they were created a higher order. They were given much more to begin with. So therefore, their transgression is greater. I mean,
and knowing what we know, Sean, about, the resurrection, first resurrection, and how we're going to be made into, immortal flesh, essentially. They know that they're not receiving anything like that, right? Like there's no atonement for their sin. They're not able to experience a type of death so that they can resurrect from a savior, right? It's like simply that's it for you. You're your one shot that you had is gone. That would suck to know that.
Yeah, and that in a sense is the, people say, well, why? I think it's even in one of the other prophets like Ezra. He asks God in Second Esdras, why make man if he's parceled out for destruction? Why make man that's going to make mistakes? He says that everyone born of man has transgressed. So, and then they're set apart for destruction if they don't turn to your laws, and it's like, why even make man then? He's asking,
woe to you, Adam. Why did you do this to us? Yeah, he goes through this diatribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's saying people, men are born corrupted now because of Adam, but even Adam himself. And what I would say, obviously Ezra gets an answer in there, but I've heard this style of question being asked from those who critique the Bible and critique anything that comes from the Bible, any kind of theological idea of God creating mankind. And they ask essentially a same version of that question. Then I'll ask, why even mess with any of it? Why make mankind if it's, if you're just going to punish him for not obeying you? And that's where I would say that he's actually made us very different and very uniquely compared to what we see with the angels, who were given everything right off the bat with authority, power, knowledge, understanding, wisdom. We were made more like children, and we were to learn and grow. And as a result of that, there's a ton of mercy that goes with that. And that's what we see all throughout the story narrative of Scripture, is he's constantly slow to anger, right? And he's constantly showing us, love and mercy, that he's not just coming right in first time we make a mistake and hit us with a hammer. You know what I'm saying? It's just like there's continually, he's like, if you just return and come back to me, I'll take care of it. I'll fix it.
Yeah, that's why I can't stand this, the Christians teaching of like dispensations of grace and stuff like that. Just like, if you knew, what these books say and how merciful and long-suffering and patient the Father was, you have to change your perspective on that. You just have to. Like I mentioned earlier, men were given 120 years to change in the days of Noah, right, leading up to the flood. In Enoch, chapters earlier that we've already gone over, the angels had to go before Yahweh and say, are you looking down on the earth and seeing what's been taking place on this earth of yours? Like, it's going crazy. And it was over a span of many, many years. And he was mercifully allowing them to change their ways, right? Listen to the righteous ones that were on the earth, change your ways, and they just weren't doing it. So this concept of dispensationalism and grace ages and stuff like that, like it needs to be nullified from our thought processes and our theological stances. It just has to go away.
Yeah, it's very destructive to understanding the book in general.
Yeah,
because you start breaking it up into portions that are not in the book, and you're creating segments and chapters, and you're creating commercial breaks that aren't needed. So it's sad. But I think as we move to chapter 13, I think we're about to get a fascinating chapter, because there's some things in here I wanted to point out. But more than anything, it's just verse 1. We are going to get Enoch going to Azazel. And I think this is interesting. So I'll just start reading real quick, unless you had anything further to say about
Nope.
chapter.
I was going to say, read on, buddy.
All right. So chapter 13, verse 1, it says, and Enoch went and said, Azazel, you shall have no peace. A severe sentence has gone forth against you to put you in bonds. And you shall not have toleration nor requests granted to you because of the unrighteousness which you have taught, because of all the works of godlessness and unrighteousness and sin which you have shown to men. And then I went and spoke to them all together, and they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. And they besought me to draw up a petition for them, that they might find forgiveness, and to read their petition in the presence of the Lord of heaven. For from thenceforward they could not speak with him, or lift up their eyes to heaven for shame of their sins for which they had been condemned. So then I wrote out their petition and the prayer in regard to their spirits and their deeds individually, and in regard to their requests, that they should have forgiveness in length of days. So I went off and I sat down at the waters of Dan, in the land of Dan, to the south of the west of Hermon. I read their petition till I fell asleep, and behold, a dream came to me, and visions fell down upon me, and I saw visions of chastisement, and a voice came bidding me, to tell it to the sons of men, to tell it to the sons of heaven, and reprimand them. And when I awoke, I came unto there, and they were all sitting together, together, weeping in Abel's jail. Abel's jail. It's a unique word. It reads in this translation like Abel's jail, which is fascinating. But they were all sitting together, gathered together, weeping in Abel's jail, which is between Lebanon and Sinister, with their faces covered. And I recounted before them all the visions which I had seen in sleep, and I began to speak the words of righteousness and to reprimand the heavenly watchers. Okay. Man, so much in here. First off, here we have this again, just like we saw in chapter 8. We have this again where Enoch goes to Azazel first and then goes to the rest of them later. So there's like I'm not saying that Samyazel is under Azazel's authority, but there's a unique portrayal that Azazel is dealt with separately, and all these other guys are dealt with together. And we see that same breakdown in the judgments pronounced in, I think it was chapter 10. And so that's where I just, that's why I've had the theory that this Azazel cat was not under Samyazel's control, and he didn't take a wife. So that's why we have the judgments are different for them in earlier chapters, and that's why Enoch is going to them differently and separately. And so
that makes perfect sense, man. I mean, it reads as if, and it goes with the theory that this grouping of angels under Samyaza's rule here, they're not allowed to speak to Yahweh nor lift their eyes up to heaven, but that specific description wasn't given to Azazel.
That's right.
Which would go in reference to Job. If Satan is Azazel, he was able to go before Yahweh and still present himself, whereas these other ones were not able to do any of that.
Exactly, and if the Azazel character is the Satan character, like I've theorized, then that would be valid for him to continue to be the accuser of the brethren before the Father. That he can come up to the Father and actually put forth a case to try to accuse us. And that's so anyway, I don't want to get too far off into that, but yes, so that's why we're getting a different descriptions for different groups, and Azazel seems to be in a group in his own. And I think that seems for people to remember as they start reading the rest of Enoch. One thing I wanted to point out real quick was not only, like I've said in the previous episode, these guys are crying, right? And I think that's it's a sad scene. It really is. And what's interesting though is they're asking him for a petition, and it says, verse 6, then I wrote out their petition and the prayer in regard to their spirits and their deeds individually, and in regards to their requests that they should have forgiveness and length of days. So he's actually writing down their confession.
Yeah. Individually, there's 200 of them.
Individually, which is why he probably falls asleep trying to read it all out, because there's a lot written down. And of course,
and I think it's ironic, Sean, that he goes to this the west of Hermon, where this oath took place to begin with, where they decided to do their ridiculous pact that they made. Well, it's ironic.
Yes, absolutely, man. Also, another thing here that I wanted to point out, I thought was really fascinating, Ken, is this part right here where it talks about, in verses 7 through 9, it talks about the land of Dan, and then Mount Hermon, and then also Lebanon. And it mentions another place called Sinister. I don't know, we don't use that name today, but the other three names we still use today for these geographical areas. So there's a mountain range still called Hermon. There's an area northwest Israel still called Lebanon, and still called Dan. And so I think that this is fascinating, because you would have, there's a plausibility there, because Noah was on both sides of the flood, Noah and his boys, right? And so if they already had familiarity with calling these geographical areas these names, we're getting these same names mentioned post-flood. And because they would just continue to call them that after the waters dried out, and then they had all their children, they would say, oh, well, that's Mount Hermon, and oh, well, that's the land of Lebanon. So I think what we're looking at, since we're looking for the validity of Enoch, right? If this is mentioning places that we actually still call those places today by the same name, that's a pretty interesting and what I would consider a powerful statement for Enoch being something worthwhile, because it's actually given us a direct connection with stuff that we can go out and put our hands on today, right? We can go climb Mount Hermon today. In fact, did you know there's a UN observatory on top of Mount Hermon
Yes, isn't there a particular telescope up there of sorts?
Yeah, there's actually a UN observatory with telescopes on top of Mount Hermon today. So I think that's fascinating. But there's also the land of Dan. There's also Lebanon. We know these are areas, right? We can go to these areas. So here we have a direct connection, pre-flood things being claimed with post-flood reality that we can experience. And I think that's pretty interesting. Because it's like, it kind of brings the story home, you know, it kind of brings it into a personal touch, because he's talking about places, because there's a lot of these things in this, because this is a pre-flood story. So, and this is a pre-flood book, and a lot of these descriptions and a lot of the things mentioned in here, you don't know what's going on. You don't know where it's taking place, because, you know, these are people we can't go up to and talk to today. But I just like the fact that it brings in some things that we can go to these areas today and be like, oh, this is the mountain, and this is the mountain range where it says that these rebellious angels, 200 in total, came down in the days of Jared. That's a pretty interesting. And of course, we see in Jesus's ministry, he actually goes to that mountain, doesn't he?
He does,
right? A week before he's crucified, doesn't he?
Absolutely, yes. That's fascinating, man.
He goes up there, and at that mountain, there's occultic temples built. You know, the gates of hell supposedly is, by its, you know, cultural vernacular, but would be the gates of Hades, which is a temple to Pan and to Baal, basically. And that was built at the base of Mount Hermon. So, you know, at the place where occultism started, there's a temple at the base of that mountain. And I think that this is fascinating.
And just the whole discussion between Yeshua and his disciples, and Peter's response to Jesus' question, who do men say that I am? And then Peter says, you are the Messiah, right? The Son of God. Yeah. And he just makes that proclamation right there at a very monumental place in history. You know,
if I were to be ornery, I may even suggest that, is it possible that Jesus, you know, not only is he's excited about Peter's answer, right? He says, man didn't reveal this to you, but God in heaven. But it's almost like a subtle test of, hey, do you guys remember the book of Enoch? Who do you say I am? We're here at the base of the storyline of the book of Enoch, you know, who do you say I am? Because the book of Enoch clearly talks about the Messiah to come. Yeah. We haven't gotten to those chapters yet, but I mean, we're going to get to chapter after chapter that just talks about the Messiah with full-on descriptions. And here we are in a book strongly associated with Mount Hermon. Jesus is at the base of Mount Hermon asking his disciples, who am I?
Yeah, and as Enoch is going to expound upon, as you said in later chapters, how he deals with these watcher angels that are quaking, and in this chapter that we just read, crying, petitioning the Father through Enoch, and Enoch wakes up from his vision with an answer, right? And it's not one that they would like, that's for sure. But I find it fascinating. We kind of, you know, chuckled a bit where it says that they were weeping in Abel's jail. Do you think there's anything to that? So we know Abel is kind of contained in a jail right now, right? A prison of sorts.
Yeah, if that's a land area, or I don't know if that's mentioned for a town, it's very interesting. And I've never seen that.
Sheol is directly below that area of Hermon.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be interesting, but and I've always theorized, if, you know, the pit in Revelation is going to be in the land of the north, which would be right near Hermon. So I don't know. And I mean, they built a temple inside a cave that goes into the mountains of Hermon called the Gates of Hell. It makes you wonder what they used to know. You know, and it's very interesting. Very interesting. So, I mean, I just think that there's a lot we don't know about what's underneath us.
Yeah.
And that I think that's something that we probably won't get to know before the Messiah comes back.
Even though men are trying with all their devices to poke and prod and drill holes and see what they can get to, right? But
I would say there's some government agencies that know, they're just not telling people. Because the average person, I should have said that, the average person, you and I, We may not get to know till the Messiah returns exactly what's going on underneath us, and as far as how far down is Sheol and what's going on there. But I think that the government definitely has a strong idea because they've been investigating it for years and years. Many governments across the nation, across the plane of the earth. So I think that it would be interesting to see if the Messiah shows us later, kind of the here's the rest of the story in a Paul Harvey style. I mean, here's all the stuff that was going on underneath you, because we have the verses that say that every knee will bow, everything on the earth and under the earth, in heaven, on the earth, and under the earth will bow to Yeshua. So there's stuff going on underneath this for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. What isn't it interesting though when you look at like the biblical creation model that Enoch gives us? You've got above us, above in the firmament, in multiple layers of that, all this activity happening, and then you've got below us in the realms of the pit and Sheol, you have all this other activity happening, and it's just like we're caught in the middle, man. We're just in the middle of
all sandwiched in between. Yeah.
And both heaven above is interested and tasked to be involved with us on the land, and then the things below all want to get back to the surface, right?
Yeah.
And like we're the center focus of it all, both literally and directionally in the creation model. So it's fascinating.
Amen.
Chapter 14. Do you want to read this one?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, cool.
The books of the words of righteousness and of the reprimand of the eternal watchers in accordance with the command of the Holy Great One in that vision. I saw in my sleep what I will now say with the tongue of flesh and with the breath of my mouth, which the Great One has given to men to converse therewith and understand with the heart, as he has created and given to man the power of understanding the word of wisdom. So hath he created me also and given me the power of reprimanding the watchers, the children of heaven. Before I go on, Sean, verse 2 here, verse 3, where he says he's created man, to give him the power of understanding the word of wisdom. Like, that to me tells me that we can understand God's word. That this conception that you won't understand all of God's word. We can never understand it. He's so infinite out there. His word is just, there's too much. You'll never understand it in your lifetime. I think that's a lie completely. And I think you agree with that too.
That's 100% a lie. And that is one of the things I've said many times in many videos, is that we are able to understand God's word. He intended for us to understand it. That's how we are edified by it unto a change of behavior. And that is how we can grow in our righteousness and our walk with him, is by understanding fully what he's saying to us, so that, and he didn't make it too hard. We just have to push out the lies of the enemy and believe his actual words so that it's not hard, and that's.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Verse 4 here. I wrote out your petition, and in my vision, it appeared thus, that your petition will not be granted unto you throughout all the days of eternity, and that judgment has been finally passed upon you. Yet your petition will not be granted unto you. And from henceforth you shall not ascend into heaven unto all eternity. And in bonds of the earth the decree has gone forth to bind you for all the days of the world. And that previously you shall have seen the destruction of your beloved sons, and you shall have no pleasure in them, but they shall fall before you by the sword. And your petition on their behalf shall not be granted, nor yet on your own, even though you weep and pray and speak all the words contained in the writing which I have written. And the vision was shown to me thus. Behold, in the vision clouds invited me, and a mist summoned me, and the course of the stars and the lightning sped and hastened me, and the winds in the vision caused me to fly, and lifted me upward, and bore me into heaven. And I went in till I drew nigh to a wall. But maybe we should just stop there real quick. Do you want to address those verses there, Sean, before we get into this detail here?
Sure. Yeah, we can stop here for a second.
Because I think verse 9 and onward is worth kind of talking about separately on its own.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically they're told that they're gonna never ascend into heaven, that they're bound to the earth essentially, and that they're gonna have to, before all this, they're gonna have to watch their sons, the Nephilim, the giants, die and destroy themselves. And we're told that that's within a period of 500 years that they're to do that. and one of the angels actually goes and incites them to do that, excites them, and they bring about that destruction upon themselves. But
And so there, from previous context, what we've already read, then we can safely conclude that this particular passages from 1 through 8 is talking to Samyaza and his associates, but not Azazel.
yes, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Because this is in connection with their specific judgment and how that's going to happen to them. So, yeah, very interesting.
Right on. All right, I can go on if you have anything else to throw in there.
None on that particular one, because I think it's they didn't get their petition granted. We see that's repeated. They're reminded of the judgment that went forth, which is the destruction of their sons. But I think it is interesting to say that they will not get back to heaven.
Yeah.
So this, again, like we talked about last episode, there's these other theories out there that they're going to be released. And with those other theories, we get the inclusion of Revelation 12, where it claims that Satan and his angels are thrown down from heaven. And so that's where they claim, well, they'll see the angels are back out. The bad angels are back out. They're thrown down from heaven. And I'm like, let's look at the definition of the word angel in the Greek. And then also let's take in the context of what Enoch actually says. The bulk of these 200 angels are not getting out. And they're not coming back. And of course, like we talked about last time, people will try to make the case, but look at how technology has increased. See, they're coming back and they're doing the same things. And I'm like, no, we still got the same bad guy's been out the whole time. That has all the same knowledge that the other guys did to give to mankind. He's been out the entire time. So there's no reason to think that he couldn't be the one giving advanced knowledge to people. But I personally think there's a reason for there's other biblical reasons for the increase of knowledge at this time.
Yeah.
The last 100 or so years. And it doesn't have to specifically rely on rebellious angels getting back out of their punishment to go start doing these deeds again. So that's just the way I view it personally.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that. And I would just add, my current perspective differs just ever so slightly in that I think that where I agree that the 200 watcher angels are imprisoned and they're staying there and they haven't been released, that there could potentially have been other angels that fell but did not participate in the Genesis 6 mingling with women, and that there could be other, corrupted angels that are just like Satan, Azazel out there that are skirting the law, are still within the bounds of safety, if I can put it that way. But just because of the Prince of Persia and all these things. But I understand that there are demons that are, 1/10 of the demons from the fallen Nephilim, that when they died, they are under Azazel, under Mastema, Satan. So it could very well be that too. And I haven't really looked into that any further, but I'm obviously willing to change perspectives if the context demands it. So.
Yeah, and I think that, and we're going to dig into that idea because it's a good idea, and there's some plausibility there. So we're going to dig into that idea later in Enoch. I think when we get to chapter 68 or 69.
Yeah.
And then so stay with us, guys. Maybe that may be episode 15 or whatever. I don't know, but
30 at our rate. Yeah.
Episode 38. No, but hey. Regular TV shows have like 22 episodes every season, so we'll be all right.
All right, with further ado here, I'll go to chapter, or verse 9 rather, Sean.
Okay, sounds good.
And I went in till I drew nigh to a wall, which is built of crystals and surrounded by tongues of fire, and it began to affright me. And I went into the tongues of fire and drew nigh to a large house, which is built of crystal, and the walls of the house were like a tessellated floor made of crystals, and its groundwork was of crystal. Its ceiling was like the path of the stars and the lightnings, and between them were fiery cherubim, and their heaven was clear as water. A flaming fire surrounded the walls, and its portals blazed with fire. And I entered into that house, and it was hot as fire and cold as ice. There were no delights of life therein. Fear covered me, and trembling got hold upon me. And as I quaked and trembled, I fell upon my face. So we're just going to stop there real quick, Sean. So this structure, which is, based of crystal, it sounds like, to me that's very reminiscent of, what Ezekiel essentially sees in chapter 1, I think it is, and chapter 10, and in Revelation 21, where it's talking about the New Jerusalem. Are you of the opinion that this is what this house is being referred to as?
Yeah, I think every time we see we see a unique mention in Ezekiel about these firmaments being made of like a crystalline structure, and it's also rendered in many translations as sapphire, which I think is fascinating because we also have in Exodus 24:10 what seems to be a mention of sapphire, crystalline firmament. But that I just want to make sure people remember the previous context of Genesis when we see this word heaven mentioned in these verses in Enoch, that the word heaven is the name that was given to the structure called the firmament. So Genesis 1:6-8, that it was a firmament, solid, substance that divided the waters above from the waters below. But then Enoch is going to mention different levels of that firmament structure. And so here we get the mention of the word heaven, as well as a house built of crystals, which I think is fascinating because sapphire is a crystalline structure. So, and then we get, like Enoch 25, supposedly Mount Zion, the entire upper portion of it is made of sapphire, which would be like a huge crystal top on a mountain, and by the way, sapphire, many people, when you hear that word, they think of blue. Sapphire comes in almost every color. It's just a form of crystalline. Now, the most popular, cosmetic version of sapphire that we use for jewelry is blue, but there's a lot of different colors of sapphire. It comes in all different colors, and it even comes in clear. So you could have, a wall with floors made of crystal and a groundwork of crystal, and its ceiling, which I think is fascinating because it's mentioned in a house and it has a ceiling, right? And its ceiling was like the path of the stars and lightnings. So this is a fun analogy, Kim, because this is giving us a direct comparison to a ceiling being like the path of the stars. So is the ceiling moving in a circle that we observe, or is it talking about the shape of the stars, of the path of the stars?
I would say the latter.
Yeah, because of the ceiling, right? Right. So is it possible that it's referencing a curved type of ceiling in this house, like a dome roof to the house?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, it reads as such.
So just something I thought when I was reading this.
Yeah, and even where it says in verse 11 here, its ceiling was like the path of the stars and lightnings, and between them were fiery cherubim. I mean, like I said, that sounds like Ezekiel 1, where he's shown the cherubim, and then above them is this firmament-like crystal structure that's holding up on top of that Yahweh's throne.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, this is a great parallel to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1-10. And then I think also...
Yeah, the fire, in verse 12, a flaming fire surrounded the walls and its portals blazed with fire. If we go to Genesis, right, where when Adam and Eve were kicked out, and there's a flaming fire kind of surrounding it, do you think that's what that's referring to as well?
I don't know, because we see a lot of descriptions here about near the throne of God and around the throne of God that we're going to get into in these chapters, where it seems to see like they can just... There's what looks like a river of fire at one point, and these other guys are standing in fire, and that it's not affecting them, and they seem to be made of fire. So I'm wondering if it's just they have the power over that idea of fire.
Yeah. Well, verse 3 in Genesis, chapter 3 in Genesis says, "So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the way of the tree of life." So I don't know if this is what Enoch is approaching here in this vision of his. It sounds kind of like it could potentially be.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We may get more description as we read on.
Yeah,
I think that there's these portals blazed with fire as well in verse 12. What's interesting is verse 13, as I entered in that house, and it was hot as fire and cold as ice. You're like, oh, well, make up your mind, man. That's what's going on here.
Dry ice.
Yeah, hot as fire and cold as ice. I don't know really how to understand that, to be honest with you. But
Sean, what's interesting is that he's feeling something, right? There's a tangible way of, like, he's got sensation.
That's right.
while in this vision / dream where he's, experiencing these things. So there's feeling to it too, right?
Yeah, because he says, he follows that up with, there were no delights of life there.
Yeah.
So it's in a place of uncomfortability. Let's just put it like that.
But I guess where I'm going with that is, in Revelation where John is taken up into heaven, right? And in the spirit, it says, and then he's revealed all these things. From what I gather is when these prophets are taken into these visions and shown these things, right? They're taken up in the spirit. They can still have sensations, as Enoch is having here. So it makes me wonder, just like the talk about Sheol and all that stuff, the afterlife, where, in Luke 16, Yeshua is referring to the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And as we approach Enoch 22, which with Sheol and its descriptions and stuff, what is there potential as a spiritual being once we die to have feeling, even though it's not in a body of corporeal, material?
That's a great question.
I've wondered it. Just because it seems like there is something that you feel, but it's not fleshly feeling, right? It's a spiritual.
I agree that we definitely have sensation of some sort. We have still emotion of some sort. We read that in other books, both in the canon and in the extra biblicals, whereas people are in emotional torment after they die if they were unrighteous. Yeah. But as far as physical torment after you die, I don't know if and because I haven't really studied it out yet. So normally I don't talk about stuff I haven't studied, but that's where I would just say I would have to look into further to look at all the descriptions in the scriptures about like what we feel post body death compared to a vision while we're still in the body, a good vision where we're taken to a place. I almost feel like that's a different type of transfer of a spiritual nature than our soul leaving the body to go to the preservation chamber of Sheol.
Yeah, because
but yeah. I just have to study it more, which is why I probably shouldn't say much more on it.
Well, as we go through Enoch, we're going to see that like Enoch is shown some things that are so terrifying that he's like thrown to the ground and his like countenance like melts on him, and he like it just seems like there is something that you do feel in these spiritual.
That would be absolutely. I agree with that. You're definitely able to consciously perceive things and have emotions toward things, but as far as physical delight or physical pain or pleasure, I don't know if in a vision it's the same type of feeling as what is described to us as those who are in Sheol, in the unrighteous in Sheol, and what they're facing and how that torment is described. Because I can confidently say that kind of torment described in Sheol is not physical fire and pain. That is not given to us as a description in Enoch. But it is described. I can't remember which book it is. Which is why I should stop speaking on it.
As in Second Baruch too.
Yeah, I think it talks about how it's their emotional torment is as if a flame of fire. Yeah. And so I just because I just don't. I also just hope that most people understand that are watching this, that Ken and I do not hold to Catholic doctrine. And Catholic doctrine teaches this idea of burning in eternal fiery torment. And so they take a lot of verses out of context that are spoken about the lake of fire in the Gospels and in Revelation, and they'll try to turn that into saying that's what Sheol is, when Sheol has its own definitions in Scripture.
It's a totally separate compartment, different.
Yeah, it's not the lake of fire. In fact, things are brought out of Sheol and put into the lake of fire and destroyed. They're not just an eternal burning torment in the lake of fire. It's a place of destruction where the soul itself is destroyed completely, as Yeshua tells us in Matthew 10:28. So just as you're watching along, I just want people to make sure that you understand where Ken and I, in our personal beliefs and our study on that particular subject, come to, because we will get to that in Enoch 22 as we go up. But just as a preface, I just want to throw that out there. What did you stop at verse 15 or 16?
I did, verse 15.
Okay, cool.
You want to pick up, Sean?
Well, I just want to mention in verse 15, it said, there was a second house greater than the former. And I think that's interesting because now he's in this place, but then he goes to a place where there's even a bigger place. Or even, you think the word greater means in size or in like beauty or in awe and how it looks?
It's hard to say. I would think that it's bigger.
And it says it's built of flames of fire. So I'm just
I don't
like,
know how that's going to hold up the timber frame. That's interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating description, man. And verse 16, of course, says, in every respect, it's so excelled in splendor and magnificence and extent that I cannot describe to you its splendor and its extent. So, yeah, I'll just let you keep reading because there's some stuff I want to comment on this as well. So
Sure, yeah. Okay, verse 17, and its floor was on fire, and above it were lightnings, and the path of the stars, and its ceiling also was flaming fire. And I looked and saw therein a lofty throne. Its appearance was as crystal, and the wheels thereof as the shining sun. And there was the vision of cherubim. And from underneath the throne came streams of flaming fire, so that I could not look thereon. And the great glory sat thereon, and his raiment shone more brightly than the sun, and was whiter than any snow. None of the angels could enter, and could behold his face by reason of the magnificence and glory, and no flesh could behold him. The flaming fire was round about him, and a great fire stood before him, and none around could draw nigh him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, yet he needed no counselor. And the most holy ones who were nigh to him did not leave by night, nor depart from him. Until then I had been prostrate on my face, trembling. And the Lord called me with his own mouth, and said to me, Come hither, Enoch, and hear my word. And one of the holy ones came to me and waked me, and he made me rise up and approach the door, and I bowed my face downwards. Wow, this is insane, John. We're getting a snapshot of Yahweh's throne essentially here, and it's just covered in fire at all directions.
yeah, and this definitely makes sense of the idea of being an unapproachable light.
Yes, for sure. And his angels can't even go to it, right? They have to stay their distance.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But we get more of the same descriptions of this second greater house that we got of the former house, which whereas the floor is fire, lightning, and path of the stars is ceiling also was a flaming fire. So we now have the walls are on fire, the ceiling is on fire, and the floor is on fire. So that's
it's a hot environment.
Well, it reminds me of, Exodus 3 and 4 in the burning bush, right? So it's a flame that was not consuming. So it's almost like it's a unique type of flame. And if that was just the flame that was surrounding the angel standing in the bush, if the bush itself wasn't really on fire, but it was the flame emanating from the angel inside the bush, that's something to consider. And that could be what we see here, or as you see, like somehow in this realm, in this existence above the firmament, these guys can deal with fire totally different than we can, and it's almost like it just doesn't consume, which is fascinating. You got
it sounds like it's almost like plasma or something, like
right. Yeah, it makes you wonder what kind of fire we're actually talking about. But yeah, I just think that it's fascinating because you've got streams of fire coming from underneath the throne. The throne is also crystal. Then the wheels thereof as the shining sun. That's another fascinating concept. This also reminds me of the book of Enoch or Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And this wheels and a crystal floor and a crystal throne and.
So Sean, in terms of direction, just so we can give our viewers maybe a better understanding. Does this greater house, do you think directionally, is it above the former one that we had just seen Enoch? Because it seems like he's looking down and he's seeing the same agitated stars above him as below him that he saw previously. You know what I mean? So it's like he's seeing like underneath him the former level that he just came from,
So wait, say that again. You said he's looking down at the stars?
Where was it?
I'm trying to make sure.
The floor was on fire, and above it were lightnings, and path of the stars, and its ceiling also was. I guess in verse 17 just makes it seem like above this place there were lightnings and the path of stars, and its ceiling was also flaming fire. It sounds like the previous environment that he was in. So I don't know if is it the same ceiling that he's seeing, but just a house above that, or is it a completely different firmament level?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me because it doesn't give you much direction as far as the first house he goes into, and then he fell upon his face and beheld a vision. There was a second house greater than the former. So unless he's not really traveling anywhere, but he's just having a different vision of a different place.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. But
and it was a portal. It says in verse 15, and the entire portal stood open before me. I wonder if did he have to walk through a portal to get to that place or something, or?
Well, just vision, clouds invited me, mist summoned me, in the course of the stars and lightning sped and hastened me in the winds of the vision, caused me to fly, and lifted me upward and poured me into heaven. I went to drew near a wall which was built. So it's like he could be ascending levels of firmament. But
yeah.
At the same time, just trying to hammer this out. That's probably the best way to look at it. He's probably ascending levels of the firmament.
Yeah, that's how it describes to me. And then other extra biblical texts seem to indicate that there are stages, levels in height to firmaments. And I want to know what Paul is referring to, man. When he talks about, I once knew a man, whether in spirit or out of the spirit, I cannot tell you, who went to the third heaven. What is that about?
Well, I would say, just personally, it's the heaven. You talking about the man or the place where he went?
The place where he went and the man. Do you think that was Paul?
I don't know. I don't know if personally, I don't know if the person that he's speaking of, whether it's him or some other person he knows who made this claim, is changes anything about what he says he saw. Because again, we have the definition of heaven from Genesis 1, and that is the firmament. So if he went to the third heaven, that means he went to a third firmament.
Right.
Right. So which means we're taking these terms as in 1, 2, 3. Right. So whatever the third heaven is, I would say it's a third level of firmament. How many levels of the firmament are there is a question that I would ask at that point. What's on the third level and not the second? What about the fifth? Is there a fifth? So there's a lot of questions that brings up, and I think I think Enoch is going to address some of them as we go. But clearly, wherever it doesn't tell us a number.
Can I just read 2 Corinthians where this is out real quick, Sean, before we move on?
Sure. Yeah.
And this is referring to Paul. He says, I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knows. Such a one caught up to the third heaven. So as Sean's saying, that's a third firmament. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body I cannot tell, God knows, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Of such an one will I glory. So he was caught up to paradise, apparently, this guy, which is in the third heaven.
Yeah. So that would be very, very interesting if the New Jerusalem to come is in this third level of heaven, because that's called the paradise of God.
Yeah.
So I don't know if what's above it is the interesting part, or if that's just the beginning of the top of it. So if you imagine a house with 3 levels, and the top level is the third, and then that is the biggest level, so to speak. So it's almost like you get 2 basements, and then the third level is the massive level that it has the biggest interior dimensions and size. But of course, here in this Enoch 14, he's having a vision of 2 different houses. The first one's smaller, and if that's what he's referring to as a house, is the space that he's in. I don't know if it's the width and breadth of what Scripture describes to us as the firmament at creation, unless this is just inside the area of where God and the angels exist. There's a big house that's balls of fire, and then he sees another bigger house. You know what I'm saying? That's what we don't get, is that kind of directional detail. So it's very interesting. But clearly, the bigger house has God's throne in it, which is fascinating. And out of that throne, it seems to be a river of fire that's coming out from the throne. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Streams of flaming fire, so that I could not look thereon. In verse 19, and the great glory set thereon, and his raiment shone more brightly than the sun, and was whiter than any snow. Verse 21, none of the angels could enter and could behold his face by reason of his magnificence and glory. No flesh could behold him. So you got a guy sitting on a throne, just like a big light bright. You can't see him. You can't technically get too close, but everything is coming from this guy. Everything is coming from him. It's like pure energy, you know.
Yeah. And what's interesting, Sean, is it says that the cherubim, in Ezekiel, it says the cherubim were holding up, right, this crystal throne. And then we have the cherubim mentioned here as well in verse 18. And that Yahweh, when he descends and stuff, he rides the cherubim. I just find that interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, right? And it's also when we get this kind of description, gives me a reminder and makes me think of the validity of statements in the Psalms where he says, the earth is my throne, and heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. Who can build a house for me? Right? So
Enoch says that later too, actually. Enoch says the exact same thing verbatim. Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. Yeah. And so, because man can't build a house that could house something described like this and all this power and glory. So God is again the God of rhetorical questions.
Yes, he is.
He's perfect at them. So, all right. Anything else you want to say about this one?
No, we just get some descriptions of the Most High, his raiment shown. We already read all that. It matches with what the canon says, right? And 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Those are the angels, and we know that those angels are going to be coming down on the day of the Lord.
Yep. And this looks like a callback to chapter 1.
Yep.
Yeah. Which also we see repeated in Jude, verse 14, right?
Yeah.
Got it right this time. I had it wrong last time.
It's all good. And no flesh could behold him. So all the appearances that we find in the Old Testament where we have these angels of the Lord, that's not literally Yahweh. Because no flesh can behold this mighty God of ours, at least not in these bodies.
Right. It's got to be angels coming to give his messages so that we can actually interact with them.
And then even Enoch, in his form that he's been showing these things, it's knocking him to the ground, and he's prostrate on the floor, and he's got to be picked up by one of the holy ones.
And this, of course, is even in a vision. So technically, a fleshly body.
Yeah.
I don't really know how that works, to be honest with you. I don't know how these concepts, when they talk about being in a vision, being in the spirit, I don't want to call it astral projection because that's like a bad term, but I don't know how else to explain it. Like, I don't know exactly how this works when these prophets have these visions and they seem to go places, but are they just laying there with their body wherever they were, and they didn't actually go anywhere?
Yeah. Well, if we think about it, he's at Mount Hermon right now experiencing this out of his body, right?
If that's what I'm asking, is that how it works?
That's how I understand it, yeah.
They got people just hanging out, making sure nobody messes with his body. I don't know if it's working like that, or if he's literally taken in the body as well. But then you've got Paul's statement saying whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. So he's alluding to this idea that you can have a vision out of the body, and you're just we went through chapters 12, 13, and 14, Ken, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. We have Enoch going both to Azazel and to the rest of the Watchers to tell them what's going to happen to them, pronounce their judgment. The Watchers didn't take it very well. Many of them cried. And then he also is taken into multiple houses in heaven, houses built with walls, ceilings, and floors of fire. He gets to see the throne of God and the Holy Great One sitting on there in unapproachable light. It's amazing. And then I think that'll be all that we'll discuss for this particular episode. Next episode, we're going to see in chapter 15 God's response to Enoch and what he says to him. And then we also get to see in a few later chapters up to 18 how the stars apparently transgress their orders of movement in the firmament. And so apparently, Ken, unless I'm reading this wrong, what we're going to look at next episode is these stars are not all of them, but some of the stars are not in the same place that they were during the days of Enoch. Does that sound right?
I believe that's a high possibility for sure. And some of them that did transgress were dealt with, or are going to be dealt with at least.
Yeah, that's wild because there's a ton of, think about how many millennia that we people have looked at the stars. And so And then, of course, we get the command in Deuteronomy 4:29 not to look to them and worship them, right? And I think that this is fascinating that we're seeing that even they, apparently, whatever they are, can somehow transgress their instructions for what they're supposed to be doing. And so we're going to look at that next time, guys, in the next episode. But we greatly appreciate you joining us here this episode. And as always, if you got questions or comments, leave them below, and we'll try to get to them as soon as possible. If you like the information that we shared and you like the show in general, like, share, and subscribe it on social media. Click subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and tap the bell for notified when we release new episodes, so that way you can stay up. We release them every Saturday night. And so I have a great time doing this. We get so much out of this. We get to compare this amazing extra biblical book called Enoch to what we have in the canon and see how much of it lines up. And Ken, thanks for joining me again this week. Any last words?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I hope this encourages you guys, and I hope it gets you to dig deep into these extra biblical books, and just test the things that we're talking about and see what kind of conclusions you guys can come to. And I get edified when we have these conversations, Sean, and it just excites me for our Most High God and His Son, and just that we get to be in a relationship with this Almighty One who dwells in unapproachable light, surrounded by fire, and that He loves us and He wants us to understand, the things that Enoch revealed and the scriptures, right? So I hope this encourages you guys, and thank you so much for joining us, and please join us next week.
Okay. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Sean Griffin, co-host Ken Heidebrecht. Thanks for joining us for episode 4 of Honor of Kings as we explore the book of Enoch. Make sure to catch us next week for episode 5. See you then. Bye, everybody.